All right, let's talk about something that so many organizations get stuck on. How do you move from a state of total cyber chaos to a place of actual control? Today, we're going to demystify the whole process of building a formal cyber risk management methodology. We're going to turn that confusion into a clear, actionable plan.
So here's our game plan. We'll start with why this is, first and foremost, a leadership challenge. Then we'll cover what happens when you're just navigating in the dark with no plan. From there, we'll actually build our cybersecurity rulebook, see how to put it into practice with a risk register, and finally bring it all together to see how you get from chaos to real control.
First up, the leadership challenge. You know, it's so tempting to look at cybersecurity as just a technical problem for the IT folks to solve. But the truth is, real risk management, it's not about firewalls and software. It's about culture. And culture always starts at the top.
This quote from Simon Sinek absolutely nails it. Leadership doesn't just nudge the culture, it defines it. If the people at the very top don't truly prioritize a security-first mindset, how can you expect anyone else in the company to? This is the foundation. Everything else we're going to talk about is built right on top of this.
So what happens when that leadership isn't there? Well, you're left navigating in the dark. And honestly, this is the default mode for way too many organizations, just reacting to problems as they pop up instead of getting ahead of them. And as you're about to see, the cost of flying blind like this is, well, it's huge.
And this slide right here, this is a perfect picture of that chaos. Without a common rulebook, you get totally inconsistent risk assessments. What's a 5-alarm fire for one team is just a minor blip for another. That, of course, leads to completely misaligned priorities and a ton of wasted money. And then there's the huge lack of accountability, which just fuels that blame game culture when things, inevitably go wrong. The whole thing makes it almost impossible to talk about risk clearly or to meet your basic regulatory duties. Which brings us to the big question, right? How do you stop all the guesswork and start actually managing? How do you build a system that gives you clarity, consistency, and control? Well, the answer is you have to create your own cybersecurity rulebook. This is what we call the cyber risk management methodology. It's the formal, written-down framework that's going to guide every single decision you make about risk. Now, the key here is that this isn't just some vague policy document that sits in a binder. It's a meticulously designed framework. Its entire reason for being is to make sure everything from assessment to monitoring is consistent and clear, because when everyone is playing by the same set of rules, you get rid of the guesswork.
A really solid methodology is built on these 6 pillars. You start with purpose and scope. What exactly are we trying to protect? Then you've got regulations. What external rules do we have to follow? You establish general guidelines, and that includes having that really tough but crucial conversation about your company's risk appetite. You clearly define roles so everyone knows their part. You map out the process step by step. And finally, you define your performance indicators, the numbers that tell you if you're actually winning.
And let's just pause on that third pillar, because it's usually the hardest part. Defining your risk appetite means you have to answer the question, how much risk are we willing to take on to hit our goals? If you set it too low, you could kill innovation. But if you set it too high, it could be catastrophic. It really forces a deep, honest conversation across the entire business. Hey, remember that blame game we were talking about earlier? A tool like this, a RACI matrix, is the antidote. It makes it crystal clear who is responsible for doing the work, who is accountable for the final outcome, who needs to be consulted, and who just needs to be kept informed. So for any big decision, like accepting a risk, this chart shows you exactly who makes the final call. No more confusion, no more pointing fingers. Okay, so now we've got our rulebook, but we need a place to actually apply it, right? And that brings us to the risk register. Think of this as your central command center. It's the dynamic tool that brings your entire methodology to life.
At its heart, the risk register is the single source of truth for every known risk. And what's so important is that it's not some static spreadsheet you fill out once and forget. It's a living, breathing tool that you use to track risks from the moment they're identified until they're resolved, all while constantly analyzing their impact. This is probably my favorite analogy from the source material because it's just so perfect. Accepting one tiny little risk might seem like no big deal, but if you don't have a central risk register to see the whole picture, all those little minor purchases can add up until your total risk exposure is way over your budget. The register is like your credit card statement. It shows you the grand total.
So the register helps us manage this really crucial distinction between inherent risk and residual risk. Inherent risk is the raw danger. It's the volcano before you've built any protective walls. Residual risk is what's left over after your defenses are in place. And this is the core idea, right? The goal is not to eliminate all risk. That's impossible. The goal is to knock that inherent danger down to a manageable, acceptable level.
And this is exactly how the risk extracts a risk's entire life. You start with a description, where you document the risk and its raw, inherent level. Next, you look at your existing controls to figure out the actual risk you're facing today. And finally, if that's still too high, you develop a treatment plan to bring that final, residual risk down into an acceptable range. It's a clear, repeatable life cycle for every single threat you face.
So let's bring it all home. When you put this kind of formal, structured approach into place, you fundamentally change your organization's entire posture. You get a massive strategic advantage.
This is the ultimate transformation. This is the whole point. You go from being a reactive firefighter, constantly surprised and putting out the next blaze, to being a proactive chess master. You're anticipating threats, you're moving your resources strategically, and you're making smart, informed decisions that don't just protect the business, but actually help it succeed.
And that really just leaves us with one final question to think about. I want you to take a hard look at your own organization. Is your approach to cyber risk really built on a proactive, documented plan like the one we've just laid out? Or, if you're being honest, is it just a strategy of hoping for the best? The answer to that question could make all the difference.